The process is absolutely essential to everything because you can't really have any true creativity if it's not inside of a process that is moving you in a direction. And you're allowed to change whatever you want. You can change your process, you can change the direction, but you've got to have a starting point, right? When things aren't going correctly, where do I go? First thing I saw of Brandon was him getting into this bucket of ice. And you know, sometimes things just speak to you. I got on the Wim Hof site, signed up for the 10-week online course because I'm like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be an instructor. I'm going to be great at this. And then I started to put on these seminars separate from my business, right? There's just these Wim Hof seminars. And I would little by little say, well, here's how it applies to leadership. And at some point, a couple of years ago, I was like, wait a second, these two things are the same.
So I'm excited to talk about the cold stuff just because I've been doing this for a long time. And so I want to get into kind of what got you here. So just for a reference to our listeners, give us a brief background of your history, because I think it is cool. We get to interview a lot of badasses on this show, and your past is really cool. And for all of our listeners, you are definitely a high performer. Just give us a little bit of background, and then we'll move into some of the cool, cold stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, this, you know, if we wanted to talk about, you know, combat or, you know, Hell Week and Buds or all, you know, I could do that all day. And that's good. It's good fun. People enjoy those stories. But you know, we do have a different story over here. It's not just predicated on the dangerous stuff I did in the FBI or the SEAL teams. And it has a lot to do with that cold exposure. And it has a lot to do with the heat injuries I sustained in this background that I had. So yeah, like you said, you kind of hit all the things. You know, I'm a Naval Academy graduate. I was actually a surface warfare officer before I was a SEAL, so I was on a ship. And I don't talk about that nearly enough. And I'm going to start, because that was a great learning experience as well. But then in the SEAL teams, got injured. You know, that was a real big disappointment. I got medically discharged because I loved being a SEAL. You know, had to, you know, I battled it out in the private sector for a while, which was great. I loved that. 9/11 rolls around. I got to get back in this fight. I get myself medically cleared, which is a whole story in and of itself. Joined the FBI and spent 13 years there, primarily as a terrorism investigator, where, you know, I tracked them down all over the world. I was also part of the FBI SWAT team. I was attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment as an FBI agent for combat operations in Afghanistan in 2010. And then, you know, from a leadership perspective, I got real frustrated with the FBI. They, you know, their mission is great, but, you know, the things we're hearing about them now in the news, they've earned that scrutiny. And I was privy to that stuff on a smaller scale. And that's why I left. And I start, you know, and we talk about, what do we do, right? You know, life, you know, love and impact. You know, what did I do and why did I want to do it? Well, I love leadership, right? And all I cared about was impacting people's lives with my lessons, which I think people can get something out of. So that's kind of who I am and you know, where I came from.
Well, and sometimes I think with leadership, it's really important. Sometimes you've been in experiences where you've had the highest level of leadership. You've seen the most amazing leaders guiding and mentoring. And then you get into leadership positions where it's more of a management role, where people are all just middle managers and nobody's willing to make the hard decisions or to lead in the way that you teach. And I could feel that in reading through your book and understanding a little bit of the frustration that you explain. It felt to me like it came from a place of management and people that really hadn't had the training as leaders. They just happened to continue to go up the ranks, but they weren't always really maybe poised for the leadership that you teach.
Yes. I couldn't have put it better myself. In the SEAL teams, the expectation is of great leadership. That's the expectation. And, you know, we don't always get there. People are better than others and so on. And we all make our mistakes. But when we talk about culture, right, the things we do, that was the culture. If you were a bad leader in the SEAL teams, you heard about it and you knew about it. It was embarrassing if you made leadership mistakes. Yeah. And you got promoted by and large based on your ability to lead, right? That was it. You know, there's certain things you have to go through from a bureaucracy standpoint in the Navy to get promoted, but it's up or out, you know? And in the FBI, it was just the opposite. It seemed like the best people shunned leadership positions because they were like, no, I won't put myself in a position to not have impact because I know the leadership above me won't allow me the autonomy to make decisions on my own. And that I ran into that all the time from a personal level, running big cases. You have to have a team with you. And I would make decisions. And my God, making decisions on your own with that autonomy and initiative in the FBI, it was like, oh, no, no, no. And the problem was they would hide behind safety. And what it really was ego. They didn't like somebody having a better idea or executing an idea that they didn't sign off on or it wasn't their idea. And that's, I'm not being petty when I say that. That was the issue. And it's because they'll just let anybody be in a leadership position because what they don't do is what they really need to do is force people to be in leadership positions. Errol, for example, we know you would make a great leader. We know you love working cases. Too bad. We need leaders. You're in. They could do that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the best people would become leaders. So it was the dichotomy was striking, the leadership in between these two well-known organizations. And the FBI continues to go down bad road in its leadership. And I hope I'm rooting for them, even though I'm frustrated with them. I'm rooting for them. I hope they figure something out.
Yeah, it's the bureaucracy and management is all about. I learned this lesson early on. I worked for a big company and I loved leadership, but I really didn't love the when you can't make the right decision. When you know the right decision is in front of you, everyone around you knows it's the right decision, but then because of bureaucracy or because of someone's ego, you're making a different decision. That's challenging and it puts you in a compromised position. And then you can't lead the people you're responsible for leading in the way that you need to. And for you, it's life and death. You've got undercover guys out there doing jobs to, really take down these major initiatives. And you have people that are fighting about the egos and what they think is important. I read the story in the book, and now your book is The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership, how leaders inspire confidence and clarity in combat, in the boardroom, and at the kitchen table. And I've read a lot of leadership books, really, really good book, really, really good insight, and, simplified down to the process and the five things that you lay out, which I think are really impactful. Can you just go over a couple of them, or at least the five, so our listeners can hear that, and then we'll get into some of the other things.
Yeah. And look, even more exciting news, what we've done is, I wrote that book a couple of years ago, and I meant it to be a very process oriented book, a very academic book. I have to put stories in there. And I think we put some good, fun stories in the book to bring home our point. But what we did do was and I don't want to get off topic, but after I wrote that book, right, the question is, Errol, where did this process come from? You talk about the struggles you had, like where? Well, I had no context. And when I was a SEAL back in the late 1990s, I suffered two major head injuries. And back then, traumatic brain injury, or the diagnosis of it, wasn't a thing. And so I suffered unknowingly for over 20 years with traumatic brain injury until I got lucky to get diagnosed and healed with a non-pharmaceutical process. But my point is, there was now a context, and I never shared those stories because for a lot of reasons. So we put out the second edition of the book. And what we did was added about 150 pages to a part one, which tells the stories of the injuries, which are very dynamic and exciting SEAL stories. We tell the struggle I went through with the medical board, because I got discharged because of injuries to my arms and stuff like that. But I was like, but my head, guys, these headaches won't go away. And they kind of dismissed that. And it hurt, it made me feel a lot of shame. And then I started to struggle with things, with emotions. And so 20 years of struggling and thinking I was just becoming an irrational person. That's how I developed the process. The doctor I eventually met, as we did this scan on my brain, he said, I need to learn about this process you developed, which I wrote about, and this cold exposure stuff. Because the long and short of it was, he said, with your injury, the last thing you should be is a happy and productive individual, both personally and professionally. You should be in a very dark place. And really, you should have been more inclined to be one of those 22 veterans a day that committed suicide. That's how bad your head injuries were. Tell me about this process. Okay, so that's kind of a thing. So, right, the process, art, and science of leadership is gone. That is being replaced coming in this October with Ice Cold Leader, leading from the inside out. And it gives now a history of how this process was developed and validates it. So I hope that's okay that I just
No, I
threw
love it.
that in there.
No, I absolutely love it. I think what was so interesting is sometimes you pick up a book and you don't know what you're going to get. What I found was, okay, I could see how adding stories and giving that dynamic in the background, especially with what we're going to touch on of how you actually helped yourself in this process, is even more valuable. But there's just gold in this. So the foundation was golden. The actual, ways that you lay it out. See, I feel like the word process gets a bad rap, sort of like the word discipline. Like discipline, process is just discipline, right? If you you apply it consistently, it's the same kind of thing. And people hate both those words, but they're how you actually succeed.
Right. We need to get past that stuff. I guess they got overused at some point and very rigid, but process is absolutely essential to everything, because you can't really have any true creativity if it's not inside of a process that is moving you in a direction. Okay. You're allowed to change whatever you want. You can change your process, you can change the direction, but you've got to have a starting point, right? When things aren't going correctly, where do I go? I go back to my process, right? Oh, I veered too far off of it. That's why I went astray. But back to the original point, what are the things that I laid out in this process? And these are now the things that ultimately saved my life, right? I developed this as a life-saving mechanism. So the doc asked me, right, tell me about the process. And I said, well, it's essentially a process that solves problems. It's what the brain goes through. And it starts with identifying my emotions all day, every day, at all times. And then understanding when I have that emotion, what is my intuitive action based on that emotion? So I'm constantly learning about myself. When I get angry, for example, I tend to lash out. Oh, I'm angry. And if I tend to lash out, that is not going to help me. So I've got to be aware of that. And then I've got to decide what is the proper behavior that I want to exhibit in this moment. And then I have to make a plan to get through whatever situation I'm in. And then, of course, we always reflect. And the doc said, well, that sounds fascinating. That's very methodical. How often do you do that? And I said, every time I walk into a room, I have to do that. And he goes, that sounds exhausting. I go, it's incredibly exhausting. But if I don't do it, I will just randomly act on those emotions and they're not good. My intuitive actions based on a lot of my intuitive emotions are destructive. And so, as we talked about the effects of this traumatic brain injury over 20 years, he's like, well, that sounds exhausting. I'm like, yeah, I haven't had a good night's sleep in 20 years. I have to take a 2-hour nap every day. It's tough, but that's what I have to do. And if I do that, it eliminates the amount of stress I have going into a situation. And if I mess it up, right, if I don't go through the process, I can reflect on it and go, that's why I messed it up. Now I've got to go back and fix it because I know exactly what I did wrong. So again, that eliminates the stress in my body and my mind and my brain. So now unknowingly, I'm not letting the inflammation in my brain continue to spiral out of control because I'm reducing the stress because I have a process to handle everything. So that was the first thing. So does that make sense? We can jump in on any of that if you want, but then we can move to the cold. Yeah.
That makes perfectly good sense. And I think the reason process and discipline get a bad name is because the people that need it the most are the ones that are probably like both of us. And that is that entrepreneur brain. You've got a lot of things going on. You know that you can lead, you know that you can help people. You want to do it this way. And, the process just helps ground you into actually being successful. And I love that about and I look forward to the new book because it's going to be even better for everybody. Now Wim Hof is somebody that I think is going to move us into cold. And for those people that don't know who Wim Hof is, you can watch the documentary. You can look at the story. I don't remember exactly his story, but I think it revolved around heartbreak and, you know, walking into cold and basically feeling the healing powers of the water and then developing it from there. But tell us your Wim Hof story and how it's helped you in your life dramatically change direction.
So I was turned on to Wim Hof in about 2016. So the process portion of what I just told you sustained me for many, many years just on its own, right? I got introduced to Wim Hof through a client. I was doing an event for one of my clients there, and they were going to have their 3-day offsite. And I usually run those for my clients. And he, you know, the CEO just called me and he said, "Hey, I want you to incorporate Wim Hof method in the weekend. Can you fit that in?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. What the hell is Wim Hof method?" I had no idea what it was. So he said, "Just call this guy. He's the guy who's going to do it." And Brandon Powell was his name. And I called him. But before I called him, obviously I looked him up and I'm like, "What is this stuff?" And the first thing I saw of Brandon was him getting into this bucket of ice. And you know, sometimes things just speak to you. And I was like to myself, "What is that?" Right? What is that? That is amazing. So I got on the call with Brandon. We worked out the logistics of the event. And I said, "Man, what is this thing?" We must have spent 2 hours on the phone together. He was great. Second, we got off. I got on the Wim Hof site, signed up for the 10-week online course because I'm like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be an instructor. I'm going to be great at this. And that's where I started it. About a week, right? My wife had no idea I was doing this, right? About a week into, maybe less, of the breathing and the cold exposure, my wife says to me, "Something's different this week. You know, you seem good, right? You seem really good." And the thing about the traumatic brain injury, Scott, was I was acting the correct way, right? And I was, you know, by and large, but there was still this angst in me, right? I still had this volcano inside of me, but I was managing it. And you know, it's energy, right? People can just detect when you're not right. And she was like, you seem much better. You seem calmer." And I said, "Well, it's funny. I'm doing this thing, you know," and I just briefly told her about it. She's like, "Well, I don't even get it, but you can't stop." And that was it, right? So the wife is the one who gives you the best feedback, right? The most honest feedback.
Yeah.
And then over the course, so I started doing it for myself. And I just, again, that should be a nutshell of the effect it had. When the wife goes, you have to keep doing this because it's amazing what's happening. And then I started to put on these seminars separate from my business, right? There's just these Wim Hof, you know, 3-hour seminars, and people loved them. And then I would little by little say, "Well, here's how it applies to leadership." And at some point, a couple of years ago, I was like, "Wait a second, these two things are the same. They are one brand, my leadership process and the wellness. I just call it leadership wellness. Get well physiologically, reduce inflammation, learn how to recognize stress via the ice bath, right? Scientifically resetting. So when you do that, you can have a clear head and then focus on the process." So that's kind of where it all came together for us. And that's why we just we rebranded everything Ice Cold Leader, and it's their process, and there's the leadership wellness. And we've since added kind of a hot yoga element to that as well, because it does a lot of similar things. But I digress.
No,
That's the cold and the Wim Hof method part of it.
I wrote down, you know, just my own experience from cold. I wrote, the calm comes from the breath, the connection that gives you the ability to respond instead of react. And, I started doing cold when, I had some, back issues, and, they told me that I needed surgery on the lower back and that I'd never be able to play sports again and all these things. And I was like, you know what? This is all mental. It's all inflammatory. I've got to get it under control. It was at a stressful time in life. So I started doing cryotherapy every single day, 6 days out of 7 a week for 3. I said, I'm going to do it 90 days, cryotherapy. And I started doing that. Well, what I learned is I started to heal myself much, much quicker. Got back to playing soccer in the men's leagues and having fun. And then it progressed to the cold therapy, and I started doing cold therapy. I did it almost an entire summer with my neighbor in 2019, 2020. 2020 was probably when we were doing it mostly. I was doing it as needed prior to that. 2020, we started doing it with the kids, and we were teaching the kids how to do it. So now their younger twin daughters were doing it. The boys were doing it. They were doing 3 to 4 minutes at a time. And I noticed my back never hurt. There was zero pain all summer long. And then I stopped doing it. So then I started filling up the bathtub and doing it on my own. I ended up buying a plunge. So I bought the cold plunge, of which for the last year, I now do it every single day. And now what I don't do, and I want you to talk to our listeners, because a lot of people do cold plunges, but I have used Wim Hof. Like, I pulled the YouTube video he has. I think it's an 11-minute video. And I've done 11 minutes in the cold tub doing the breathing that Wim Hof teaches in one of the videos. I don't remember what it was, but I pulled it up a bunch of times. And that was how I would do the longer amounts of time. Any other time, it's like 3 to 5 minutes. I'm in, I'm out. I use the infrared sauna. To your point, though, the ability to deal with everything else in business, Errol, is completely life-changing. So just the stress that you have in life in general, and I know from a lot of friends that were Navy SEALs and other high performers, you're taught to be calm, collected, make the right decision, follow the process, the foundation, right? But then when you get home, it's really difficult to be the same human, because the minute something outside the ordinary happens, you're reacting and not responding. And I wasn't much different. To your point, I think trauma, for all the people that didn't have major head injuries, trauma plays a major part in this and can be applied the same way. So I'll digress now with that. I've given you a little bit of insight. I am a huge proponent of cold. I literally did it for 5 minutes this morning while I did a Zoom for our company I was not on film. I just turned the film off, but I'm not a weird boss, I promise. But I definitely, I definitely believe in it, and I refuse to not do it if it's available.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in what you just said, right? We could just take one of those things and spend the next 3 hours on it. First thing, kids. I have my kids do it. I work with kids for example, Amanda Pelkey is a former U.S. Olympian hockey player and gold medalist in, I can't remember what year it was, but she runs these hockey camps that my daughter goes to, or just the girls. And she asked me to come in. And when I go to her camps, we do ice baths for the kids. Now we modify it. The young kids put their hands in first. We have some fun with it. But our point to them is, first of all, you have stress as a child. You just don't know what that is or what it feels like. We're introducing the kids to understanding and recognizing stress. That's stress. How does that feel? That makes me scared. Okay. Have you ever felt that way before? Yeah. When my friend was mean to me, when I get out on the ice and somebody's better. This is kids, right? So then we tell them, now this is what it feels like. And then we teach them how to breathe through it. The confidence they get, the life lesson they get, right? So for kids, yes, you don't just throw them in, you got to be gradual. They've got to kind of want to do it.
Yep.
But that's my job, right? To get them to it. But even the same holds true for adults. I think half the problem that adults have is they don't recognize the stress as a visceral thing when it happens. They just, to your point, react to it. When we practice in the ice bath, and we say, okay, let's use my mind here. Let's think about what's happening. This is an induced panic attack. This is what it feels like. And I know that to get through it, I have to focus my attention on my breath. Now it's a meditative exercise. If I start thinking about how cold it is, I'm not going to be able to relax. Focus, breath. The power of the breath. Why is that? Because when I exhale, the vagus nerve activates. That serves to calm us down. There's science behind it. We're not just hugging trees here anymore, right? When we do that as adults, we then recognize it when we go home, when we go to work and go, oh, I'm stressed right now. Now we start to work through it. Can I tell you a quick story about how I know for a fact that works?
Please.
So I've done the Wim Hof method. My business is still very young, and I'm out on a call, and I'm going to go meet a potential client, right? I'm in Philadelphia, and I'm early, of course, because I'm always early. So I'm at a coffee shop and I'm reading a book, because I always have a book with me because I'm always early. So I have to have something to do. Anyway, it's Simon. I'll never forget it. It's Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. I'm reading through that book, but it starts with a story of this pilot named Johnny Bravo. And Johnny Bravo was starting to go through this incident he was in combat, how he's covering the special operations force, and he was describing the terrain. And basically, I'm getting it because he's describing, I know exactly where he's talking about. He's talking about the KG Pass in Afghanistan, and he's describing things that I had been through, right? And place I'd been. I was enjoying the story incredibly until I stopped. As I look down at the book, it's soaking wet. I'm sweating all over it and I'm shaking, having a panic attack. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm having a panic attack. It was like a double panic attack. And this is a true story. And I said, okay, but this feels really familiar to me. I don't know why it feels so familiar. And I'm like, this is what happens when I get into an ice bath. And I literally said to myself, how do I control myself in an ice bath? I breathe. I took 2 breaths, was calm. Okay, fast forward, I go home, I tell my wife about this thing, right? And she says, well, do you think you need to go see somebody? Do you have PTSD? Is it a late onset? And I said, look, I don't know. Maybe I do, and I'll go see somebody. But what are they going to do? They're going to try to help me get through a panic attack. And they're probably going to try to give me some medication, which I'm not taking. I said, I kind of got through the panic attack. And my wife, usually in these discussions, she's generally right. Even she had to say, I think you might be right. Because I was right. And so we said, look, let's keep an eye on it. But that's the point. It's just a panic attack. And so often PTSD, what is that? That is somebody just reliving a stressful thing over and over and over again. And now it's becoming part of who they are. And now it's just the continued stress, inflammation, and now the inflammation's killing them. So anyway, right. Everything you said in the cold exposure, that's it.
I've heard it. I've heard it. Dr. Don Wood, who I really like and admire, does a lot of trauma help and phenomenal doctor. But he says that traumatic events in your brain show up like they're in 4K HD. And like what you have to do is you have to take them and make them just a part of a story. So it has to be almost like the commercials. When a commercial comes on, you don't pay attention. Nobody watches the commercials. They just move right through. It's just another thing. But when it comes through in high def, excuse me, it's very, very difficult to zone that out. And so when it's coming in high def, it's chaos. It's crazy. And you have to kind of silence it. And all you did was go right back to the training. I'm shocked, Errol, at how great it has been. And I've done it since probably 2000. This was 2016. I started doing the cryotherapy, to the point where now I'll do cryo if I can't get ice baths. The ice bath to me is different. It is cryo's like cryo's a cheat code. So it's way easier. It's not mentally as exhausting. I can get in the bath in the morning sometimes. And I could tell you right now that I'm not in a good spot, meaning that as soon as I get in, I'm like, oh shit, this is cold. And I'm not even right in the right space. And I immediately have to zone myself in and say, you're chaos. You need to chill. You're moving too fast. The whole day's in front of you. And then you're in this present state where everything changes. And I have not adapted to, I have the Wim Hof app on my phone. And I really haven't done the trainings that could really elevate it. So I feel like I've only begun to understand. So walk the listeners through the differential when you accompany the breathing and the cold, how that really makes a significant difference.
Yeah, just to close the loop on a couple of things you said on the cold. The cryo, cold is cold. It's all good for anybody. Get into a cold shower. You're going to be good, right? Physiologically, it's good. However, from an emotional standpoint, a mind standpoint, first of all, there's nothing quite like staring at a bucket full of ice. So you've got to get yourself right. You cannot hide from that. Cryo versus an ice bath. The water is 60% more conductive than the cold air. It's going to be more challenging. Okay. So that's, that's that thing. And, if we have time later, we can talk about how long to stay in and all that. But the other thing is that you brought up that I want to, before I go into the breathing, is immediately where you are emotionally in the ice bath. Because if you're in a good spot, you're going to get into that ice bath. You're going to get your breath. You're going to be calm. And then you're going to start thinking, hey, maybe I could do some things. Maybe I could use my mind to warm myself, right? You get to some really elevated places. If you're stressed, you're going to spend your time trying to get control of your breath. It is an absolute 100% accurate assessment barometer of where you are from a stress standpoint in your life. It's a fact. And, where are the studies on that? I don't have to give you any studies. I'm telling you, trust me. Okay. So that's just to close the loop a little bit on the cold. Now, the breathing. Now, the Wim Hof method breathing is a very aggressive and specific breathing technique. It's essentially a hyperventilation. Now, if Wim heard you say that, it's not hyperventilation, it's a Hofferventilation, Hoffervation, but that's what it is. It's super aggressive. So you cannot do the Wim Hof breathing technique in the ice bath because you might get lightheaded. You might even lose, and then you go under the water. And now you're going to, so they're two separate things.
Okay.
That's most important to make clear. Again, the Wim Hof breathing serves a very specific purpose, and that purpose is to reset the nervous system. Okay. Well, your listeners just have to trust me that that's what it does, because all of the science now is on WimHofMethod.com. She doesn't do anything anymore without a team of scientists. So when we say, well, what does that mean? Reset the nervous system. That means that you literally, wherever you are elevated from a stress standpoint, and whatever that does to you physiologically, mostly creating inflammation caused by stress, it eliminates the inflammation in your body, reduces stress. So now you're starting at ground zero, a great and beautiful place to start. Nice and relaxed, right? Why do people feel so good when they get and relax when they get out of the cold? That's part of it. It helps to reset the system. Okay. Now, the breathing, if you do the breathing in the cold, if the breathing is a quotient of 1 and the ice is a quotient of 1, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's really 1 + 1 = about 8, right? Something like that. When you do them both together, the science shows that it has an even more impact, more positive impact on your physiology and resetting your system and exercising your nervous system and things like that. The breathing actually is more of a quotient of 2 to 3 to the ice quotient of 1. They show that the breathing has a greater impact on the physiology. Okay. But together, so that's really the analogy I should have made. It's not 3 and 1 = 4. It's 3 and 1 really equals like 8. So that's the breathing. There's apps. You know what? Your listeners, I have my own app that I have, and I just give it, it's not for sale or anything. And I only give it out to people who've been to my stuff and say, how do I get this? So yeah, you can have my app. So if you, icecoldleader.com, anybody can reach out to me. We've got a 20-minute, a 40-minute, and a 60-minute. I know some of the apps out there are a little wonky. This is me literally leading you through it. Again, I don't make any money off of that. But there are apps out there to teach you how to do it. So that's kind of the breathing in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it, but I don't know if that answers or covers what we wanted to cover.
No, I think it totally does. I think the unique thing is that, you go through your career and have great success at different levels. You have a family and you're executing upon all of these leadership aptitudes inside of your family. And this is what most people do, but very rarely do they pull the worlds together, sort of like what you mentioned with the ice or the cold and the leadership, right? It was like one was missing the other. The calm that you created allowed you to think? I feel like it's almost like a higher frequency. Like
It is a higher
your
frequency.
awareness of frequency is so much different. So talk a little bit about that, and we'll dive deep.
It's a, and I appreciate you acknowledging that again, because, and I'm not here to badmouth or degrade anybody else's leadership work, because people are going to resonate who they resonate with. But what I will say, like any good businessman, I keep an eye on what everybody's doing, and nobody is combining the leadership wellness that I'm talking about, the physiology. And then why do we need to do that? So again, we can clear our brain and to think through this process and not necessarily make wreck decisions, make conscious decisions. See, we get in trouble because we don't think before we make a decision. We just do it. Right. And then we're like, oh my God, how did that go wrong? And when we allow this physiology of ours to get clouded with stress and the inflammation caused by stress, we can no longer think clearly, because our body's now trying to deal with, how am I handling this? And then we get sick. We know now inflammation is the root cause to every ailment that plagues us today now as a society. From cancer, everything else down. We get that under control, you're going to be in a good shape, and and then you use this decision-making process. So we are combining two very unique things into one. And look, I have to call it something. I call it leadership, right? I have to market myself some way. I'm a leadership consultant, but most of my conversations go right here with my clients to the personal life. Okay. How are you doing this when you walk in the door, right? Where are you resetting yourself? Because I can tell you, we had a terrible weekend this weekend. It was just awful. The kids were at their absolute worst. And last night, I was like, that was the worst weekend we've had in a really long time. And I woke up this morning not feeling well. And so what did I do? Right. I'm like, I'm not right here. Right. Consciously, how I was interacting with my kids, my wife, like, I don't have time to breathe right now. I have time to jump in a cold shower and reset that. And I had to do it before I came on this, because I'm like, well, I'm not going on Scott's podcast all jacked up. I got to settle it down. It is a lifestyle. Okay. It is a lifestyle that you apply anywhere. And, so again, and it's hard to do, right? It's hard to do. It's hard to do cold exposure. The breathing, you've got to do it for at least 20 minutes. It's hard to find 20 minutes sometimes. And it's not an easy breathing technique. It's all right. You're working hard, and
Right,
then
right.
you weirdly feel relaxed after you do it. So anyway, that's kind of that's the combination again. So when we talked about, we could move to war stories and Navy SEAL and FBI all day long, but this is the stuff, and this is the stuff that saved my life, quite frankly, right? And then so the doctor, if I may,
Yeah, please.
yeah, with the brain, right? As he looked at the brain scan, he said, "Look, this part of your brain's dormant. The part of your brain that requires you to react to or process emotions isn't working, and that's why you had such that struggle." He goes, "But," he said, "your heart and your brain wave are in perfect sync, and this part of your brain is in the perfect alpha state." He said, "It's complete. Those two things are completely inconsistent with that part of your brain being dormant." Right. And that's when he asked me, "What is this process that you've been through? What is this cold?" He said, "That's why you were there." Then when I got the treatment, the first treatment, literally came out of the treatment, my wife once again said, but she didn't know I was getting any treatment. And she goes, "What happened in there?" I said, "Well, we went through the scan and this, that." She goes, "Is that it?" I said, "Oh, no, no. They did the treatment, right? They put the insulin into my nose and it drips in. He's like, "You're different already." A month later, I went back for a second scan. The areas in my brain that were blue, and all that meant was there was no energy going to them. And I think the measurement was megahertz. Let's just say in the blue area in the first scan, there was 2 megahertz of energy in my brain. When I got the treatment, and then a month later, there was like 40 megahertz, completely healed. And the doc was like, "I've never seen anything like this." And I said, "Well, what do you attribute that to?" He said, "I attribute it to the same thing that you were doing that saved your life." He said, this process that you put together saved your life. And then your mind, body, and spirit were so ready for a catalyst to help you that when we gave you that catalyst, your brain exploded with energy. And here's the other thing. This process that I did, it never stuck as a habit because my brain wasn't functioning. So I had to be thinking about it all day, every day. Miraculously, now that I'm healed, now it is a habit. I don't have to think about it, but I recognize the process going through it, and I'm constantly going through it. I'm not perfect, right? Doesn't mean I get everything right. I don't, but that's the power of this thing. This cold exposure, this breathing, the resetting, and then a thought process. Without it, right, I get stuck in that pattern of negative behavior based on the injury. So I can't stress that enough, and maybe I'm going off too much on a tangent.
You're right on target. I think for all the listeners out there, maybe you weren't in war, maybe you didn't have a traumatic brain injury from a training accident, but you probably have had trauma in your life that has negatively impacted you in some capacity that puts you into a negative loop. And how most people have dealt with it that are successful is they become high performers. They become people that have way too much on their plate and they succeed and they continue to succeed, but they don't actually provide themselves with time to reset. And so I think what you're explaining is something so powerful because there's another simple technique here, and that is we have to create the foundational habits of our day in and around how to be the best version of ourselves. And if the best version of ourselves is, and it's for everybody, having time to check in with yourself. You know, I learned this during COVID. It was all of a sudden I couldn't go to the gym, couldn't go see the trainer I've been working out with for 13 years. I was rushing constantly, right? Yep. Always in a hurry to do the next thing. I'm still a busy person, but I'm really trying in my life to slow down. And you know how I slow down? I start slow. And starting slow means I have an infrared sauna. I have that cold plunge. I have a workout. I do all of those things before I get into the sprint of the day. That sets the brain for whatever's going to happen, whatever negativity, whatever challenges. And I'll give you a great example. Summertime comes and my wife's a school teacher. My kids are out of school. They're teenagers, you know, and we've got a lot going on, but I'm the only one going to work every day. So I'm getting up. I have a busy day and everybody else is having this relaxing thing. And I go into the garage and someone's in the garage. You know, it's the stupidest little things, but that changes the whole discipline, the whole process. I can reset so quickly, just like you did with the kids. It was a simple thing. By getting in the cold, I could say, okay, I'm here. People could come out, interrupt, do whatever. While I'm there, I am fully present. I am fully in a reset mode. And it's allowed me to be a much, much better version of who I used to be. It's not just, to your point, it's not 1.0 to 2.0. It's 2.0 to 8 or 10.0. It's a major difference, Errol.
And let's break down also now the process element of what you said, right? Because what you said was, when I recognize I'm feeling this way, I go do that. You have to have that emotional recognition before you can do anything, right? So the process that we just described, right? The emotion, the intuitive action, the desired action, the plan. That's how you get through it. That's how you recognize, oh my God, I need a reset, because I'm aware of how I'm feeling and how I'm acting. What do I do? And you just described, that's all you just said, right? I got to go breathe. I got to go do my cold. I have to reset myself. Nobody goes there unless they're doing that constant check-in with themselves. The other thing is, and I appreciate what you said, because I was going to bring it up, when you say you may not have been to war, right? You may not have, done these things in the FBI in these stressful situations. You may not have had these 2 major head injuries. It does not matter. My story is a story of emotional struggle. It just is able to be amplified and to be able to tell people, this is what I used with my thing. Imagine your thing isn't medical, how well it's going to work for you. right? It's still just I am feeling less than. I am feeling this way. What do I do? I am going through this hard time. How do I get through it? This is how you get through it. This is going to sound like an awful pitch, but the ice cold leader methodology is how you get through it. Okay. Again, so, we talk about a lot of these, my former teammates, the SEALs, and all these people. You hear these stories of combat and it's entertaining, but it's unrelatable sometimes. We try to get the message across. Like, here's how I got through it. It's still sometimes a little much. We're hoping that this story, my story, is relatable because it's all I had was emotional trauma. And then all I had were dark times. And all I had was self-doubt. It doesn't even matter at some point where I got it from. I had it. What do I do with it? And that's the message. You talk about your acronym, right? Life, love. Who do we love? Well, you got to love yourself, for
Yep.
God's sakes. If you want something good, if you want to have that positive impact, right? The I, what? You can't have impact on people unless you have yourself right first. You just can't, right? Faith, why? That's for everybody. That's different. But I couldn't. First, my why was I can't die, right? That's it. I can't kill myself. I can't commit suicide. I can't go to this dark place, right? You have to believe, and again, the energy. How do you show up? Well, that's how you show up. Your best. This is so. People will say, "Okay, yeah, but Scott, how do I do these things?" You've got those answers, your own answers, right? These are my answers to your life acronym:
Yep.
process and cold and breathing, right? And that awareness, it'll set you free.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything you're talking about, first of all, everybody listening, if you're a parent, I can guarantee you have shown up in ways you wish you would have shown up better. You have corrected a situation in ways that you wish you would have changed. Maybe you come from a cycle of trauma and you want to break it. You want to be a better version of the parents you had, but you keep falling into the same behaviors.
Yep.
These are ways to break it. And unfortunately, maybe it takes us all a little longer to find these things, but what I could say is I sure as hell wish I had the process that I use today 20 years ago when I was starting my life and my business and all the things that
Yep.
I'm doing. And the other thing I wanted to say to your point is for all the people listening, this is how you start, right? This is how you've just given a recipe for success. The reality is sometimes until you know how good it is when you have it, you don't know what you're missing. So you have to actually carve out some of the time. You can't be in tune or love yourself if you're not actually attached to that frequency, which means you can't just be rolling through life completely out of control, busier than anyone, and not ever check in with yourself. And if you're not checking in with yourself or giving you that extra time, it's very difficult for us to recognize we need it. Then we do it once and we're like, you ever go on vacation and you wake up and you're having a cup of coffee, staring at the ocean, watching the sunrise or the sunset, and you're like, man, I need more of this in my life. Well,
Yeah.
that's 20 minutes. That's 20 minutes of breathing. That's 3 minutes in the cold plunge. That's whatever it may be. What you're describing is something that requires a self check-in.
You can't, if it's, and people have there's such a negative, for some reason, connotation about checking in with yourself, taking care of yourself, loving yourself, because people view that as being selfish. Let's shift that paradigm a little bit. Let's take a different perspective on it. If you are truly that unselfish person who doesn't care about yourself, but cares about everybody else, that's fine, right? And you're out there, you can't take care of everybody else. You can't have the impact on everybody else that you want if you're not right, because you're just not. It's not coming off. The energy's not coming off the way it needs to be. It's coming off as stressful. Everybody understands your intentions, but they're like, "My God, Scott needs to relax. Like we appreciate what he's doing for us, but I promise you, that's what they're thinking." But when you come at it with that same selflessness that you want to give to the world, but you fix yourself first, you get yourself right first, you're going to have way more impact. So if you're one of those people who are like, I don't have time for myself, all I do is care about everybody else. First of all, check your ego at the door, okay? Because you cannot have the impact on other people if you don't have the impact on yourself first. And that takes work, it takes discipline, it takes process, all those ugly words. It's just the way it is.
It's
It's
a
not going to
cop.
happen.
It's a cop out. I mean, the truth, we can
Mhm.
call it what it is. It's a cop out. You are bailing on yourself and making it someone else's problem while you're saying you're serving someone else when you're not really serving them anywhere to the level that you could be, because and we say someone, it could be your business, it could be your
Yep.
family, it could be whatever we're doing. And honestly, I think you and I will both sit here and say we're not coming at this from a preaching standpoint. We're coming at it from an experience standpoint.
Yeah,
We have lived it, we have done it, we have found a way to change the trajectory. But what you teach is how to pull that leadership, whether it in your life, your family, your business, the cold, the reset. You're actually giving people the permission and the recipe to reset, and then the experience that they can have can be exponential from there. And I think that's really, really valuable. But people cop out. They that is something that you're doing when you're running from yourself. And I love
I
when you said,
agree.
go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. And it's time we started calling that stuff out. I used to get so mad. Somebody would call me. It'd be like a weekend, and I'd be sleeping and taking a nap. Now I was taking a nap but I knew I had to take a nap.
Right.
And oh, I'm sorry, did I wake you up? And this with this derision in their voice, or even if somebody calls me early, and you know what, maybe I did go lie down for, you know, I before this, I took my cold and I took a half-hour nap because I just wasn't feeling right. This notion that we can't sleep and we can't rest, and that you're lazy if you do this, or we're too embarrassed to admit, I am done with that. Right? Somebody goes, "Oh, did I wake you up?" I'm like, "Yeah, you woke me up." Right? Whatever it is. Now I'm going the other way. So, but again, it's society has kind of put that on us. Like, oh, you're lazy if you're taking a nap. No, you should probably try to take a nap once in a while. It's pretty good. Reset. But we can go on and on. The what I'm happy about as we talk about these very common sense things, what I like to tell people is, look, you go to somebody who's resonant, right? You got your listeners, they're getting great stuff from you. Come listen to me once, look at whatever it is. What I can tell you is this process that I just walked you through, the Ice Cold Leader, is validated. I didn't even know it, right? I was fighting a battle that I didn't even know I was fighting, and I won. And I know exactly how I did it. And like you said earlier, anybody can apply it. It's just trauma, and it's just the results of trauma. How do you deal with it? So it shouldn't be unrelatable. It should be completely relatable.
I think sometimes it's too simple for people. I actually find people wanting to complicate something that's so simple, right? Every time a friend tells me, texts me, calls me, and tells me that they're dealing with an autoimmune issue. Okay. This is not medical advice. I'm not telling you all that this is the only solution, but personally, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when I was 26 years old. I never had another issue until miraculously the same time I was opening our new company. Then all the stress was happening. Then it was turning into Crohn's. I had never had another issue. And then on top of that, I was having the back issues. I realized through this process that my body deals with stress. I mentally check it out. I go to that brown space in the brain that you were talking about where it dulls out any of the feeling and the emotion, and I ignore it and I don't recognize it. I genuinely don't even know there's a problem, right? Until the body starts screaming from the inside out. And your autoimmune issues are often, yes, they can be diet related. Yes, they can be exercise related. But here's what I've learned. Guess what we haven't found? The gastro doctor thinks I'm a miracle. And he's a friend of mine. But he literally says I'm a miracle. I'm like, I'm not a miracle. I am literally just somebody that's been testing what works and doesn't work for my body. And so I go through I have an autoimmune checklist that I give people. And it's, hey, what's your vitamin D levels? Immediately, what are your vitamin D levels? You getting sunlight? Are you going outside and actually being in nature in any capacity? Are you grounding yourself? Are you finding the sun in the morning with some time? Are you exercising? And then I start saying the cold therapy, to your point, and I love this, and I love the ice cold leader. I like what you're doing, because it pulls so many of the things people need to understand. It's simple if you just start doing it. And it's not hard. It's hard. Don't get me wrong. It's hard, but it's like, it sounds like it's too simple, but the autoimmune stuff, all the health issues that start to dissipate because the brain and the gut and the body and the energy of earth are all coming in alignment. It's really, really valuable.
I know you generally like to keep
Oh, you can
your
keep going as long as
podcast
you have
about.
enough time.
I do, because you, again, you hit on a couple other things that, since you brought them up, autoimmune. The original study for Wim Hof method and cold exposure was on autoimmune disease. It's hard to say that cold exposure cures autoimmune disease, but cold exposure cures autoimmune disease. The studies are out there, right? And that, so that's the first thing. And I don't know if you knew that study or not, but that was the original.
I don't know the
Holy,
study. I don't know the study, but I've had eczema on my skin since I was a baby. Ever since I started doing the cold therapy, I have zero. I
yep.
mean, these are all little things that are happening. It's inflammatory responses in the body. It is, I am a walking testament to
Yeah.
utilizing this stuff.
So that's the first thing, right? So the autoimmune and the cold are inextricably linked. Okay. In the best ways. We talk about heredity. Well, everybody in my family's had autoimmune disease. And I keep, every time I go on a podcast, when this comes up, I kick myself for not finding the exact numbers, but they are something in the ballpark of like 2% of the world's population, not America. 2% of the world's population have true hereditary diseases. Like, that's not a lot. It's the millions, but over the, however many billions of people are in the world, right? So what does that mean? Why has everybody in my family then had autoimmune disease? Well, because we learn behaviors create these diseases. That's why. So, everybody in my family's had cancer, so I'm doomed to have cancer. Yeah, everybody in your family has smoked for as long as or they drink too much, or they're overstressed, or whatever it is. That's why. Change that, and now heredity has nothing to do with it. Final thing on the back thing, and this is it goes to in the book. So the new book, Ice Cold Leader, we broke it down to part 1 and part 2. Part 2 is essentially the old book. So you still get the process, right? But now there's context in front of it. So that said, I mentioned a guy named I cite a guy named Dr. John Sarno. And he's since passed, but he talked about healing back pain. That was the name of his first book. And he was an MD. And what he concluded was that back pain, again, there's some small percentage of the population has true structural back issues. The rest are caused by, and you brought this up, unacknowledged emotions. He called that the unconscious mind. And that goes to my process, the importance of recognizing and admitting your emotion, not being ashamed of it, saying, well, I feel this way. It's just how I feel. It's allowed. When you start to recognize, or when you start to acknowledge those emotions, like you said, and here's what the doctor said, and people tried to, not disbar him, but whatever they do, you take away your medical license, whatever that's called. Like, they really went after him, and it went to court. And it just so happens the judge in the case went to one of John Sarno's lectures, and healed his back pain. And he was like, no, he's not a quack. I went through his thing. Anyway, it's an interesting story. But the point he was making was, your body is a closed loop. And when you have an emotion, it's your body creating something that's necessary. And when you just try to ignore it, it will not be ignored. It will scream at you in some way, shape, or form. And it's usually around some physical ailment like your back. he said, he makes the analogy. He says, people say, well, how'd you hurt your back? Oh, I bent over to pick up that piece of paper. He goes, that's structurally impossible. It's not, it's structurally impossible. So again, when you talk about your back thing and the ice, but it was mostly around starting to acknowledge these things. How am I feeling? That also went to, at least according to Dr. John Sarno, and I'm a believer, healing the back pain. So it's just another data point for the importance of now, as we go into, cold and breathing, the emotional awareness and recognition. It's vital to how we go through life.
Errol, I think you have to look at your own. I think this is one of the challenges, and let me know when you have to break on time. I'm good. I have a little bit extra.
I got about 20 minutes, but yeah,
okay.
I got.
We'll wrap it up before then. But I think this is a cool direction. I haven't gone this direction before, and it'll be fun for the listeners. What I think is very interesting is I became a research project for myself. So you go through life and everybody tells you what to do. You start the first 18 years of your life. Your parents are leading you. They're telling you, you should do this, you should do that, you should be this, you should be that. Then you go to college and you have professors or whatever, you go in the military, whatever it is, and people are telling you again what you should do. Then you go and you have your first ailment and you go and get medication and they just say, oh, take the medication. It doesn't treat anything. It just, so, and again, sometimes you need medication. Sometimes you need a reset that goes beyond the norm. But what happened is I actually started to do this research project on myself. And I started to say, gosh, this guy, I went through all the cycles that everybody told me. I went and I had physical therapy, and then I did this. And I basically checked all the boxes to acknowledge that they could perform surgery on me. Right. That's all I did was check all the boxes so a surgeon could operate on my perfectly aligned back that could still do all the things it was doing before. But my brain now started to be like, oh, well, I'm hurt, I'm injured. So it was literally defeating, right? I also went back and I started looking, I've thrown my back out like 2 or 3 times prior to this in my life. This is what I called it, right? It's what people call, they threw their back out. And one day I got out of the shower and it just went out. And I remember I went back and pulled the medical records and looked at when it was. It was 1 month before my firstborn son was born. I was a nervous wreck. I mean, like, I started to actually do the research project and look at myself and say, Scott, what emotional thing was happening? And you know how many times I bring this up to people I'm talking to and they're like, I don't have anything in my life that's bad. I don't have any stress. I'm like, you haven't taken the time to check in to really understand. It might be that your mom's sick, or it might be that your kids aren't reacting the way you want them to, or you're worried about their college, but it's something.
And it's not a competition. It
Right.
doesn't have to be this major life issue. It could be something little. I don't like my love handles. It could be that small. It's what it meets you where you are. It's not a competition. Oh, well, I didn't go through war, so I don't have the right to be. No, that's not it. The second we start in our own mind feeding our stress with other people's stress or the cause of the stress, we've lost, right? Because the things that stress you out aren't going to stress me out, and the things that stress me out are not going to stress you out. That's the first thing. The other thing is the power of the mind. It gets overplayed a little bit, but you can never overplay it. I've heard I love people who say, what's the placebo effect? And I say, thank you for bringing that up. Let's talk about that. So you did something or took something that you're claiming was irrelevant, but since we thought it would help, it helped. Yeah. So that's ridiculous. Listen to what you just said. The mind thought it and it created it. Shouldn't we have more of the placebo effect? What happens if that's what we thought about everything? If you just acknowledge the naysayer, literally just acknowledge who mocked the placebo effect, just acknowledge, yeah, the mind did that. What happens if we just voluntarily tapped into that all the time? That's pretty powerful stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's what checking in is. It's the power of the mind to recognize things.
So Errol, now we're going to the doctor and we should be requesting the placebo. Can I please have the placebo?
Give me the
I'll take
placebo.
the
Tell me,
placebo.
right. Well, give me the medicine that's going to cure me because I'm convinced that I need to take a pill. Just make sure there's, sugar in it or something like that. That's
Yeah.
it.
You know what it
And I'll be
really
good.
comes down to is anybody that wants to continue the behaviors. This is what drove me crazy about going to the gastro doctor. I ate healthy. I did all the right things. And I'd go into the room and I'd be in a room with people that genuinely wanted a medication to be able to continue to do all the same behaviors that they were doing before. If I want to eat all the fried foods and I want to eat all the desserts and I want to do all these things, how do I do it where I can get this under? Well, I got to trick my body into thinking that it's actually good for it. And, it's like
Yeah.
it's a whole mental mind game thing. And I just,
Well, we've become lazy as a society when it comes to that. And that's just speaking plainly. It's what we've done. We've allowed look, like we said, there are some things that you probably do need medication for. But you know what? I'd be hard pressed for you to give me a handful of things that you need medication for that weren't the result of some lifestyle or behavior and then thing that you created in your own body, right? I get into a car accident and I need surgery to fix the spleen and all.
go.
Western New York City is the only place I want to be. I don't want to be in India for that. But if I want to do these things, talk about these things, West is not really where I want to be. I want to be in India where they're really thinking mindfulness and all that stuff. We've got, COVID was a great example. I remember a few months into COVID when they came out, CDC came out with something that wasn't widely publicized, and which is a shame, which went to the politicization of what COVID was, because they came out with a study that said people who are dying from COVID have on average, whatever it was, 3 to 5 comorbidities, basically saying
They're all sick already.
unhealthy people are dying from COVID. Remember what COVID was initially called? It was called the novel coronavirus. It was new, right? So when a new virus enters our body and we have a weak immune system, then we are not capable of dealing with it. And our immune system overreacts and we die. That's how people died. And so the fact that, as we move into this wellness and physiology and cold exposure and breathing, what does that do? It strengthens your immune system because that's what the science says it does. We didn't have one conversation during that ridiculous, yes, I'm calling it ridiculous for everybody to hear, the ridiculous pandemic. We didn't have one conversation about the health of the people who were dying because that was some way health shaming people or shaming people. And really, the shame is that we didn't have that conversation, that we weren't honest with people and saying, here's the reason. If you get it, you're in trouble because you're overweight, right? Or whatever it is. Okay? That's not shaming, that's helping. And we never did that.
Well, it goes back to your frequency, Errol. The number one thing it goes back to is how can you acknowledge truth if you don't actually acknowledge the truth about yourself? How can you actually be in tune with yourself if you don't acknowledge where you're at, where you're starting at? And we just talked about the fact that you have to acknowledge that you're in a place where you need to calm, where you need to go chaos to calm. Well, the same thing happens with your health. The same thing happens with anything. These are all acknowledgments to that frequency that start or initiate or spark exactly what you've been talking about the entire time. It's so valuable. We also didn't talk about the vitamin D while we kept everybody inside. And,
it goes on and on. We could go on about the pandemic and the absolute upside down nature of the information that we were getting. And then again, not to go too far into this, but it's a reality. And the people who are getting silenced, if we and you had this conversation in 2020, we wouldn't be able to log into our phone, right? Somebody would have figured it out, like, shut these two idiots up, right? It was amazing. And it was,
scary.
If we go back, the people who were saying these things, they were right. And they were the ones getting silenced. They were the ones getting mocked by the general public. Conspiracy theorists. I don't know how we got so far off course from a human behavior standpoint than we did between 2020 and 2022. What a joke.
I think it comes down to one word, and that's curiosity. You know, at the end of the day, when you stop being curious, when you stop asking questions to find a better answer, you will not find you will find yourself following the leader right into a place you probably don't want to be. So be curious. It's okay to be curious. And just because someone's being curious doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. Like if you disagree with someone, be curious. Understand where they're
Just
coming from, why they come from that direction. These are all
tell
benefits.
them why you think that what you say is more accurate. It's allowed. I remember having a conversation with somebody, and I have fun with these COVID conversations now because I think we're finally moving past the point where we can do a little mocking of how we responded to this thing and the true nature of why people died, right? People died. That was a tragedy, but here's why. But anyway, I was having a conversation with somebody about the masks. And I said, well, the problem then is that you're restricting your breathing. And if you restrict your breathing like that, that makes you unhealthier and more susceptible to the virus and and really get sick and possibly die from it. And they said, no. The mask doesn't restrict your breathing. And I said, then how is it preventing you from getting the germs from the virus? Well, I was like, I didn't try, I had to actually reassure them it's okay. But do you see what you just did? You acknowledge that restricting your breathing is bad. Then you said these masks don't restrict our breathing, but they're helping because it's not keeping anything. We got anyway.
No, it actually, and it goes.
I'm not even sure where I was going.
I can bring us back. I can bring us back, and I'll round us out. We'll finish right here. But here's how we'll bring it back. It all goes back to what you said earlier. The mind, the placebo effect, is very, very strong. If you're scared of something enough and you worry about it enough, there's a saying, someone I listen to a lot, Dr. Kevin Elko says, worry is praying for what you don't want. When you visualize what you don't want and constantly spend all your time thinking about the very thing that you're scared of or that you don't want, the brain, there's a placebo effect. It will work for you. It's doing what you need it to do.
Yeah.
And it will put you right into a place where you're probably more susceptible to get sick and more susceptible to get these other things. You're also going to put yourself in environments that are going to be around people with diminished immune systems. And
well, the thing about it is that the research shows that the brain doesn't distinguish between a strong thought and actually something that happened, right? Something happens to you, you have reactions and emotions and things like that. If you're thinking something very strongly, again, the brain doesn't distinguish between the two. It doesn't say, well, that's just a thought, so I won't really process that in the same way. No, it's the same exact thing. So yeah, to your point, and I guess to close out, how I got us off track a little bit.
No, you did great. No, we're great. We're all right on target, man. At the end of the day, it's been a great conversation. We talked about a lot of great things. icecoldleader.com. We're looking forward to the book that's coming soon. It's going to only add value to the research and information that you have built upon a great and strong leadership career. Errol, I'm very grateful for having you on the show today. Thank you so much for an awesome conversation. And I hope the listeners found it to be really, really interesting today as well.
I hope so too. And we went in a direction, right? We didn't just have to talk about war stories, and that was good.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's been awesome. Right, Scott. There's different types of war stories, so we're great.
That's right.
Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.